What up, y'all? And welcome to a potentially long, completely unscripted bonus episode of the Chop Shop. And during our little quarantine we got going on here, just doing some spring cleaning in the garage, and I rolled my Flathead out and my 302 Windsor out, and I just thought it'd be cool to do just a side-by-side comparison video, so that's what we're gonna do. Check it. Alright guys, now again, this is completely unscripted. All this knowledge is just completely off the top of my head. I'm sure some of my numbers, specs, years are going to be a little bit off. Don't be too hard on me. Plus this is my second beer, and you know I'll be smoking. So, that being said, let's just, again, I got them all side-by-side comparison. We'll go over kind of what I want to do to the both of them, the differences between them. I also have a 390 big block Ford behind me, and we have a 351 Windsor, which is in the same family as the 302, but not exactly the same. So, I guess let's hit that real quick first before we start picking these two apart. So what's the difference between the 302 and the 351 Windsor? It's actually just the deck height, and I believe it's just the block is just ever so slightly taller, and I believe they use a slightly larger diameter crank as well. But other than that, everything else is pretty much completely the same. They use the same heads, the rear of the engine, you know, all the transmissions, the bell housings and everything are all the same. All the accessories are all the same. I do believe they require a different intake manifold, at least the lower plenum part, but the heads and everything are all the same. Now the difference in those, actually, the reason they do that is for more cubic inches. The factory Ford 302, I believe it, again, don't quote me, I think it's strokeable to 347. I don't think they take the factory blocks much larger than that. I do know that Dart, and I think Ford Performance, and it's one of my favorite blocks, and I really want one, they make a 302 based aftermarket block that is a 363, and I really want that. But they make aftermarket blocks for the 351 that go up to 427, so you can get some major cubes out of a 351 block, not so much a 302. And I guess, you know, again, I'm freestyling this, so let's just kind of start comparing. We'll go sames and differences. Again, I apologize, I'm freestyling. Just kind of pick them apart real quick. As you can see, they're kind of the same, you know, concept. You know, they're both internal combustion engines. They both have, you know, internal cam. This is the cam of the Flathead. See, it has a giant gear, and it does run through the center of the block, actually lower than the Windsor. I'll grab the camera as well and move it up here. And I apologize, I hooked up my mic. It's a little bit windy. Hopefully the little fuzzies on the mic muffle it a little bit. But you know, the cam scenarios are similar, not the same. This actually has, like most vehicles, a single, just individual water pump that would just bolt right here. The Flatheads actually have dual water pumps, one on each side, that obviously cools each bank. As far as the front of the engines, that's about it right here. I'm probably gonna go ahead and grab my phone and let's get on. Let's skirt the brakes real quick. I've been tossing this idea around for a minute about throwing these 5 spokes on the Merc here. I think they do or will look really good. They'll require adapters. They're a Chevy bolt pattern, but I think they'll look awesome on here. Y'all let me know what you think. Thumbs up, thumbs down. No, don't thumbs up or thumbs down my video. Comment whether you like it or not. Thumbs up the video. Always thumbs up the video. Let's start by breaking down where the engines get their displacement from, I guess. Because if you check out, this is the 302 piston, and this is a Flathead piston. Look at the difference in diameter, but then look at the difference in length of the rod. So the Flathead engine, and this is an 8BA, which, again, don't quote on my numbers, I believe makes it a 215 to 235 cubic inch engine. I believe you would measure the push or the piston rods, which I have not done yet, so I'm not 100% sure. But again, so this is 302 cubic inches. This engine is actually bored 40 over, so it's 306 cubes. But you can see this engine gets its cubic inches or its displacement from the bore, or the size of the piston bore itself. Look how much smaller the flathead is. But obviously, since the flathead has this long piston, it has a much longer stroke, which is where it gets its displacement from. And that is a perfect example of how you get more displacement out of engines. Longer rods, a crank with more throw, larger diameter pistons. The same kind of goes for compression ratios. You can get higher compression out of smaller combustion chambers in the head, which I'll check out up here in just a minute. I also have the flathead head here. But one thing that I'm going to be doing in my 302 is, if you look, these pistons have a nice deep little, I mean not deep, but a dish in them, and then valve reliefs. The pistons that will be going in it are flat tops with valve reliefs. And again, don't quote my numbers, but I believe it will take my compression ratio to, I think it's like 8 1/4 to like 8 3/4. Not a huge difference, but higher compression is higher horsepower. Same thing with the flatheads, I believe. I mean, these are already a flat top piston as is. I believe your compression ratio, more often than not, from these comes along with your piston, or not your piston, your rod. I believe your rod length paired with possibly where your center pin would go through will make your compression ratio vary in these. You can do that with your heads as well. Real quick though, one kind of cool, unique feature about flatheads, and I guess not real quick, I want to specifically hit on this, is here is all of your valve springs, or are all of your valve springs and your lifters, and then again your cam is right here, and then on the Windsor your cam would be right here, and then you completely can't see any of that. Your lifters would be right here, but your valve springs are out here, not in here. The valves are actually in the block of the flathead, as where more modern engines, the valves, and these are all out, are in the head. And that's kind of where the death of these probably really comes about. I mean, you can only, get so much flow when your intake and exhaust ports are actually in the block. I mean, there's not a whole lot going on in there, and you can improve upon these a little bit. You can run more modern valves, larger valves, bigger camshafts, etc., just like you can in a modern engine. And that's exactly what's going to go on with this thing. I'm probably going to do like a stage 1 or 2, like a drag cam. And again, I'd love to throw some Holley EFI on this, and a turbo or like a Torque Storm supercharger. That's where this thing is headed. Is fuel injection, modern, cool stuff. The Edelbrock black powder coated heads and intake manifold. Yeah, that's what's going on with this boy. And again, I have managed to bust all these valves loose. If you are a new subscriber or just checking this out, I dug this flathead out of a coworker's backyard, and it had been there for 35 years. I mean, I literally dug this thing out of the ground, and I have slowly just soaked this thing on every harsh chemical on the planet to get it busted apart. But I have all these valves busted loose. I got all these pistons out. And obviously, the engine has been disassembled. And again, let's just check out the difference. This is where all the valves are in a pushrod engine as opposed to a flathead engine, and the heads of the flathead are heavy. For one, let me move my bear. I did not prepare for this. I did not prepare for this scene. Be safe. Bow. Alright, and if I can get the sun to work on my side. Here we go. And this is where you can kind of gain some compression ratio here. You'll have smaller CC, so smaller chambers in your combustion area here, and that increases the pressure. That's where you get some extra power, requires more octane, timing, etc. But you see, you can kind of do the same thing in these. There's kind of a small little divot in these. I think some of the aftermarket heads are completely flat, which just leaves this open, which obviously increase your compression ratio. But again, these heads are nothing but that. They're just a combustion chamber, and there's some cooling jackets in it, but that's it. I mean, the heads of a Flathead are nothing. Just coolant passages, and to my knowledge, not very efficient ones. The Windsor heads, you can kind of see theirs, and these aren't even good heads. I mean, these are just factory 70s truck heads. You know, they got the GT40 heads that are really good heads. I believe the GT40P heads are good flowing as well. I don't think they're quite as well. I don't know, again, off the top of my head. I think just possibly the angle of the spark plug or location of the spark plug in the combustion chamber is different. I'm not 100% sure. Again, don't quote me, be hard on me. But here's where all of your valve springs and rocker arms will go. And again, this engine doesn't even have rocker arms. Just the cam runs right to the center here, pushes upward in these springs, opens the valve. This kind of works as a cantilever setup, is where something pushes on your elbow and then pushes down on your fingers, and there's a pendulum, I guess, in the center of my arm right here. So it tilts back and forth like that is how this system works. So it's super cool, but you know, they share a lot of similarities and oddball things. One thing that is going to happen in both engines, and this is a super old school trick that I actually read about, I think in a Hot Rod magazine article. This is not the correct penny. It would be a, is it a buffalo penny or a wheat penny? A wheat penny. This is the exhaust port for, well, your exhaust. Duh. But, oh, here's a cool little oddball thing to pick out. Modern V8s have an exhaust port for all 4 cylinders. So 1, 2, 3, 4. There'll be 8 in total, 4 on each side. If you'll note, on the Flathead, there was no exhaust ports. The exhaust ports for the engine are in the block, and there's only 3 of them. And you completely can't. And the light at all. There you go. 1, 2, 3 of them. And they share, this piston and this piston on each side share the center exhaust port, and it runs upward into the intake manifold. And what that does is heats the intake manifold for winter driving, because the atomization of air and fuel through the carburetor intake manifold actually gets so cold the engine doesn't run right. It actually needs that heat from the engine during the winter to run properly. The Windsor has a very similar thing. That is what this is right here, and it will shoot up through its intake manifold to the exact same thing. I'm having that one actually welded shut on my aluminum intake manifold that I'm using, and I'm going to just do the wheat penny trick. Apparently a wheat penny is the exact same size as this port. So that is a cool little tip about that. One cool thing about that specifically is during normal warm driving, it's not going to heat your intake manifold, which is going to make you lose horsepower. And that's kind of what we're after on both these engines, is horsepower. Neither of these engines will ever see winter again unless it's emergency situations or for donuts. I don't really have a whole lot else to talk about in these engines, really. I mean, they're super basic, and again, completely unscripted. I'm sure I fumbled my words and said some oddball things that are incorrect. Again, I don't know the exact bores, strokes, compression ratios, but I mean, engines are engines, and you can get ports for any of these engines from so many companies. And again, I urge people to go and build something different. I know that a 302 isn't different, but a Flathead is super different. You don't see a lot of those on the street. I've got my 390, and I mean, this goes for import engines and stuff too. There's all kinds of cool little import engines that get in some extra compression ratios, or higher compression ratios, bigger bores. It's just a phone call away to a company and giving them some numbers. It's a stop to a machine shop. You know, you can make any engine have more power and be cooler. So, you know, this is just an oddball little tech tip. You know, we're stuck at home, so whatever. Thanks for checking out the video. I hope everyone is corona free and has a fantastic evening. Deuces.